The wind screamed across the white land of Varine 9, a planet made of endless ice and silence where even machines froze before sunrise. The sky was gray, filled with snow that never stopped falling. Inside a broken escape pod, a young alien girl named Lyra sat curled up, her arms wrapped tightly around a small creature. Her pet, Miko. The pod had crashed 2 nights ago. There was no signal, no sound of rescue ships, no sign of life anywhere. Only the icy wind and the groaning metal of the wreck reminded her that she was still alive. The heat generator had died hours ago. Now her breath turned to mist and her fingers had gone numb. Miko shivered in her arms, its little body cold as stone. Lyra looked at the frozen window. The storm outside was so thick that she couldn't even see the wreckage of the other pods. The rest of her team, gone. Maybe frozen, maybe buried under the snow. She had tried to call for help, but her communicator cracked and died after one message. The cold killed everything here, even hope. Her lips trembled as she whispered softly, "It's okay, Miko. We'll rest soon. Maybe someone will find us," but she knew that wasn't true. Varine 9 was a graveyard world, a forgotten mining outpost where no one came anymore. Her ship had been traveling through this sector only by mistake, a navigation error that had cost everyone their lives. Miko made a small sound, like a weak purr. Its eyes blinked slowly. Lyra pressed it closer to her chest, sharing what little warmth she had left. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. "I'm sorry, Miko," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I promised I'd protect you." The metal floor beneath her was covered in frost. Her alien blood, once warm and full of color, now felt like ice water. The pod's emergency lights flickered one last time, then went out. Darkness filled the small space, broken only by the faint blue glow from the storm outside. Lyra closed her eyes. She remembered her homeworld, green skies, soft grass, and laughter. She remembered the research team she had joined to study human ruins on this side of the galaxy. The idea had always excited her. Humans, she used to say with a smile. Those strange extinct creatures who once lived everywhere. But now, in this dying pod, she wondered if humans had ever been real at all. The cold crept higher. Her breathing slowed. Miko stopped moving. Panic stabbed through her heart. "No, no, no," she cried weakly, shaking the little creature. "Stay with me, Miko, please." But her voice was fading too. She lay back, clutching her pet against her chest. The wind howled like 1,000 ghosts outside. Her eyelids grew heavy. Somewhere in the distance, thunder echoed, or maybe it was something else. She didn't care anymore. The world was quiet now. Then, something strange happened. A light appeared through the blizzard. At first, Lyra thought it was a dream. A flicker from her dying mind. But the light grew brighter, cutting through the snow like a blade. It moved closer, steady and strong. Her eyes opened wider. The shape of a tall figure walked through the storm. Dark armor, heavy steps, a glowing visor. The light came from the figure's chest, pulsing with energy. Lyra blinked in disbelief. "No, impossible," she whispered. The figure stopped in front of the pod, brushing away snow with a thick, gloved hand. The sound of metal boots echoed softly. Then came a muffled voice through the wind, deep, calm, and strangely human. "Hey, you're alive in there?" Lyra gasped. The words, she could understand them. She tried to move, but her body was too weak. The figure bent down and looked through the cracked window. 2 bright eyes met hers. Not robotic, not alien, human. The pod door creaked, and the figure slammed something against it. A tool, maybe a cutter. Sparks flew. The frozen door broke open and the freezing wind rushed in. The stranger reached in, grabbing her arm carefully. His hand was warm, as too warm to be real. "Stay with me," he said, voice steady. "You're going to be okay." Lyra tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her head spun as she felt herself being lifted. Miko slipped from her hands and she cried out weakly, "No, my pet." The man turned, found the small creature lying on the floor, and picked it up gently. He tucked Miko into his coat, close to the heater on his chest. "Got it," he said. "We're all going together." Snow blew into her face as he carried her out of the broken pod. The world outside was nothing but white and storm, but the light from his armor cut through it like fire. For the first time in days, Lyra felt warmth, faint but real. She looked up at him as her vision blurred. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man's voice came through the storm, firm and clear. "I'm human," he said, "and I'm not letting you die here." The words echoed in her mind as everything went dark, and for the first time since the crash, Lyra didn't feel afraid. She just held on to the warmth to that impossible word, human, and drifted into sleep, not knowing that her life and Miko's had just been saved by the last thing the galaxy believed was gone. When Lyra opened her eyes, she was sure she had died. The air around her was warm, the faint sound of a fire crackling nearby. For a long moment she didn't move. The last thing she remembered was the storm, the freezing pain, and that strange human voice. Then she heard something. A low hum, followed by the sound of someone moving. Slowly she turned her head. A man sat near a glowing heater, his back to her. His coat was thick and covered in frost, but steam rose from it as he warmed himself. His helmet sat on the floor beside him, revealing short dark hair and a rough face marked by scars. Her eyes widened. It wasn't a dream. The human was real. She tried to sit up, but a blanket slipped from her shoulders. The man turned quickly, his expression sharp for a moment, then softened when he saw her awake. "Easy," he said gently, his voice deep but calm. "You're safe now." Lyra's voice trembled. Where am I?" "In my shelter," the man replied, standing up. "About 3 clicks from your crash site. You were half frozen when I found you?" She looked around. The place was small but solid. Metal walls, power cables, and a single heater built from scavenged parts. Snow was piled outside a sealed door. A table with tools and old circuit board sat beside a sleeping pod. It wasn't a ship. It was something someone had built, piece by piece. Her gaze fell to the small bundle near the heater. Miko. Her little pet stirred, blinking weakly before letting out a tiny sound. Lyra gasped, tears filling her eyes. "Miko!" She rushed to the creature and held it close, feeling its faint warmth. The man smiled slightly. "I wasn't going to leave your friend behind," he said. "Almost froze solid, but it's tougher than it looks." Lyra looked at him with disbelief. You're human." He paused for a second before nodding. "Yeah, name's Evan Carter. Engineer, explorer, and apparently a magnet for trouble." Her mind spun. "But humans are gone. Everyone says your kind died centuries ago. It's impossible." Evan chuckled quietly, rubbing his hands near the fire. "That's what most people think." "Guess I didn't get the message." Lyra stared. He looked tired but strong, his hands covered in burns and scars, his eyes calm but alert. The eyes of someone who had survived too many winters. "How long were you out there?" she asked softly. "Too long," he said. "Been stuck on this planet for nearly 4 months. My ship went down during a magnetic storm. Lost my crew. Been fixing this shelter and sending signals ever since." He glanced at her. "Then your crash happened. Saw your distress flare. You're lucky I did." She lowered her gaze. "My team, they didn't make it." Her voice cracked. Evan was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry." The heater hummed softly between them. Lyra felt the warmth returning to her limbs, but a chill of fear remained inside. "You said you've been trying to send signals. Does that mean we can't leave?" Evan shook his head. "Not yet. Communications fried. The magnetic storms block everything. But I'm working on it." He stood and walked to the corner, checking a device made from old transmitters. Sparks jumped, then faded. Still nothing. "But I'll get it running." Lyra watched him closely. The way he worked, calm, focused, determined, it reminded her of stories she'd read about humans. They never gave up, even when everything was lost. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Why did you save me?" she asked suddenly. Evan looked at her with surprise. "Why wouldn't I?" "No one else would," she whispered. "Not for a stranger. Not for someone like me." He smiled faintly. "Guess that's a difference between us and everyone else." Before she could reply, a low rumble shook the walls. The heater flickered. Evan froze, listening. The sound came again, deeper, closer. Lyra's heart pounded. "What was that?" Evan grabbed his rifle from the wall. "Something big," he said. "And it's outside." He moved to the door, checking a small screen that showed faint heat readings. Shapes were moving through the storm, they're slow and heavy. "Predators," he muttered. The storm must have driven them closer. Lyra's hands shook. "Predators here?" Evan turned toward her, his eyes serious but calm. "Stay behind the heater and keep Miko close. If they try to get in, I'll handle it." She stared at him. "You can't fight them alone?" He gave her a small grin. "I've been doing that since the crash." The door rattled as something slammed against it. A deep growl echoed outside, shaking the walls. Lyra clutched Miko tightly, eyes wide with terror. Evan aimed his weapon toward the entrance. "Don't worry," he said, voice steady as ice. "They won't get you." Outside, the storm screamed louder, hiding the sounds of claws scraping against metal. Lyra could see his shadow against the firelight, the last human, standing between her and death itself. And for a moment, even through her fear, she felt something she hadn't felt since the crash, safety. But that feeling shattered when a loud crash echoed above them, followed by the sound of tearing metal. Evan's voice was calm but firm. "Stay down, Lyra," he said, raising his weapon toward the ceiling. They found another way in. The ceiling groaned as claws scraped across the metal, each sound louder than the last. Frost dust fell like snow from above. Lyra froze where she sat, holding Miko tightly against her chest, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Evan didn't move an inch. He kept his rifle raised, eyes locked on the weak point in the roof. The firelight flickered across his face, calm, cold, and ready. It wasn't the face of panic. It was the face of someone who had seen death before and refused to bow to it. Then the first tear appeared, a long, thin crack in the ceiling. Cold air hissed through, followed by a low, rattling growl. Lyra whispered, "What are those things?" Evan's answer came in a low voice, almost a growl of his own. "Ice reavers. I've seen them before. Smart, strong, and hungry." The ceiling buckled. A claw tore through the metal with a sharp screech. Lyra gasped as a monstrous hand, pale, scaled, and tipped with black talons, and punched through. Evan didn't hesitate. Bang, his rifle thundered. The flash of plasma filled the room. The creature above shrieked, smoke rising from the hole. But the sound only angered the others. Now more shapes moved outside. The ground shook as they began circling the shelter, claws dragging against the walls. Evan reloaded fast. "They hunt in packs," he said. "They'll try every side." He glanced back at Lyra. "Get down. Don't move unless I say." Lyra crouched low behind the heater, wrapping Miko in the blanket. Her breath came fast and uneven. She could hear the scratching, the heavy breathing, the sound of claws testing the door. Every second stretched longer than the last. Evan moved quickly, setting a few metal canisters near the entrance. Improvised explosives. He muttered, "Let's see if you like a warm welcome." The door suddenly bent inward with a loud clang. A massive shape slammed against it again and again. Lyra screamed as the hinges cracked. Evan pulled her behind a pile of crates just as the door burst open in a storm of snow and wind. The creature that stepped inside was enormous, 8 feet tall. Its body covered in white scales, its eyes glowing like dying stars. Its mouth split open in a hiss, revealing teeth made for tearing metal. Evan fired. Blue plasma tore into the beast's chest, sending shards of frozen flesh flying. But the creature kept coming. "Stay down," he shouted, grabbing a metal rod from the floor and striking the beast across the head. The weapon sparked, glowing red from the heat. The smell of burning ice filled the air. Lyra could only watch in horror. The beast swung its clawed arm, throwing Evan across the shelter. He hit the wall hard and fell, blood running down his forehead. "Evan!" she cried, her voice breaking. The creature turned toward her. Miko hissed weakly in her arms, its small body trembling. Evan struggled to his feet, one arm hanging limp. He grabbed a detonator from his belt and pressed a button. The canisters at the door exploded, blasting the creature backward in a burst of fire and smoke. The roar shook the whole structure. When the dust cleared, the ice reaver lay still, half buried under debris. But outside, more growls echoed. They weren't done yet. Evan limped over, coughing through the smoke. "We've got to move," he said, grabbing his helmet. "They'll be back in minutes." Lyra stared at him, her voice shaking. "You're hurt, I'll live," he said, forcing a small grin. "Come on, help me pack the power cells." Together, they scrambled to gather what little they could. Energy packs, tools, food, anything that might keep them alive outside. Lyra's hands shook, but she forced herself to move. "Where will we go?" she asked. "There's an old mining station east of here," Evan said. "If we can make it before nightfall, we might survive." He stopped suddenly. The heater flickered. Miko's fur glowed faintly, a soft golden light pulsing from its small body. Lyra gasped, "Miko!" The little creature looked up, its eyes bright for the first time in days. The warmth around it grew stronger, melting the frost on Lyra's hands. Evan stared. "That shouldn't be possible." Miko's from my homeworld, Lyra said breathlessly. Its kind can store heat, but only when their bond feels danger. As if understanding her words, Miko squeaked and leapt toward the fire, standing between them and the open door. The glow expanded, wrapping the shelter in warmth. For a moment the cold stopped biting, and the howling wind outside faded. Evan looked at the little creature with disbelief and respect. Guess your friend just saved us again. Lyra smiled weakly, brushing tears from her eyes. He's small but brave. Evan nodded, wiping blood from his brow. Bravery comes in all sizes. Then the roof groaned again, louder, deeper. The beasts outside were gathering once more. The warmth was fading fast. Evan grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and offered Lyra his hand. Time to go. Stay close. Don't stop no matter what happens. She took his hand without hesitation. The heat of his grip felt like life itself. As they stepped into the storm, snow whipped around them and distant howls filled the air. Behind them, the small shelter cracked and collapsed, flames flickering briefly before being swallowed by the white storm. And somewhere, hidden in that endless cold, the ice reavers began to follow. The storm howled like a living thing, a sea of white and fury that swallowed everything in its path. Lyra could barely see beyond Evan's shoulder as they pushed forward through the endless snow. Every gust of wind bit into her skin like knives. Behind them, shadows moved, tall, silent, and hungry. Evan led the way, his visor glowing faintly through the blizzard. "Keep close!" he shouted over the wind. "Don't fall behind!" Lyra nodded weakly, clutching Miko against her chest. The little creature's faint warmth was the only thing keeping her from freezing solid. Each step felt heavier, her legs trembling, her breath shallow. She had no idea how long they'd been walking, minutes, hours, or days. On Vereen 9, time itself seemed frozen. Then came the sound. A low growl carried by the wind. It was close. Too close. Evan stopped, raising his rifle. The glow from his helmet reflected off a shape moving in the fog. One of the ice reavers, its body blending perfectly with the snow. Its eyes gleamed like tiny suns. Lyra's heart skipped. "Evan," he didn't answer. He knelt down, scanning the ground, and whispered, "They're hunting in a circle. They're driving us somewhere." "Where?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Toward their nest," he muttered grimly. "Smart creatures. Smarter than they should be." A shriek split the air. Another reaver appeared to their left, bounding across the ice with terrifying speed. Evan fired, the blast lighting up the storm in flashes of blue. The creature stumbled, roared, and vanished into the snow again. "They're testing us," he said. "They want to see how strong we are before attacking." Lyra swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Evan looked back, his visor glowing red in the wind. "We fight back before they decide we're food." He pointed toward a cluster of ice ridges ahead. Tall, sharp, like frozen spears rising from the ground. "There, natural cover, move." They ran, slipping and stumbling through the storm. The growls behind them grew louder. Miko squeaked in fear, pressing closer to Lyra's chest. The moment they reached the ridges, Evan set down his pack and began placing small metallic discs around them. "What are those?" she asked. "Shock mines," he said quickly. "Homemade. Won't kill them, but it'll slow them down." Lyra helped him place the last few. Her fingers were numb, but she forced herself to move. She didn't want to die. Not here. Not now. Moments later, the first reaver lunged from the fog, massive claws reaching out. Evan shouted, "Down! Boom!" The mine exploded, lightning arcing through the snow. The creature shrieked, flailing wildly before collapsing in smoke. The light from the explosion revealed 3 more reavers circling them. 3 left, Evan muttered, reloading. Maybe 4. Lyra's fear turned into something else, anger. "Why are they chasing us?" she asked. "We didn't do anything." Evan glanced at her. "They're not chasing you because of what you did. They're chasing you because you're warm." The words hit her like a punch. Warmth. Life. The one thing this frozen world hated most. The next reaver lunged. Evan spun, firing 2 precise shots. One struck its shoulder, the other its neck. The beast screamed and fell, but another came from behind, slamming into Evan's back. His rifle flew from his hands. "Evan!" Lyra cried. The reaver roared, pinning him to the ground. Its breath came out in icy bursts, freezing his armor plate. Evan gritted his teeth, punching the creature's face with his bare fist. The metal on his glove cracked. Blood froze instantly on his knuckles. Lyra looked around desperately. Her eyes landed on one of the burning shock mines still sparking nearby. Without thinking, she ran for it. "Lyra, no," Evan shouted, struggling under the beast's weight. She grabbed the mine and threw it straight at the creature. The blast hit both of them. For a second, everything was light, a flash of white and blue. Lyra flew backward into the snow, her vision spinning. When she opened her eyes, the Reaver was dead. Evan was on his knees, panting heavily, smoke rising from his armor. He looked up at her and said with a hoarse voice, "That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen." She gave a shaky smile. But it worked. Evan laughed softly, the first real laugh since they'd met. Yeah, it did. The storm began to calm. The last Reaver, wounded, limped away into the fog. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. Lyra crawled to Evan, checking his arm. The armor was cracked and frostbite crept across his skin. "You're hurt," she said. "I'll manage," he replied. "We need to keep moving before more show up." He stood slowly, reaching down to help her up. The moment their hands touched, she felt that same warmth again, stronger this time. Not just physical heat, but something deeper, something alive. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You could have left me." Evan looked at her, his face hidden behind his cracked visor. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We don't leave anyone behind." The storm began to fade, revealing the pale horizon ahead. In the distance, faint lights flickered, the remains of an old mining station buried under ice. Evan pointed toward it. "That's our next stop." Lyra stared at the lights, her heart filling with new hope, common fear. "What if something's waiting there?" Evan's voice was quiet but steady. "Then we survive it, together, behind them." The dead Reavers lay frozen in the snow, proof that on this deadly planet, something far more dangerous than beasts had returned. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world carved in silver and silence. Lyra and Evan stood among the shattered ice ridges, their breath steaming in the frozen air. The sky above was pale blue, a color so rare on Vereen 9 that it almost looked like hope. Evan adjusted his cracked visor, scanning the distant horizon. "There," he said, pointing. "The mining station." About 3 kilometers east, Lyra followed his gaze. Faint lights blinked far away, buried beneath layers of snow and frost. It didn't look like salvation. It looked like a tomb. Still, she nodded. "Let's go." They began walking. Each step crunched through deep snow. Each breath came out in misty clouds. Miko sat inside Lyra's coat, warm and quiet, its tiny body pulsing with faint heat. Evan's movements were slower now. The wound on his arm from the last battle had stiffened and the frostbite spread along his glove. "You need to rest," Lyra said gently. He shook his head. "Can't. If I stop, I freeze." She frowned, watching the way he limped, how his body moved as if powered by something beyond strength. Sheer will. Humans, she thought, were supposed to be extinct. And yet this one kept going when no creature should have been able to. Hours passed. The sun never truly rose on Vereen 9. It just hovered behind thick clouds, a dull white glow that gave no warmth. The silence was heavy, until they reached the edge of a frozen canyon. The mining station lay below, half buried in snow, its towers broken, its gates frozen shut. Antennas stood like the bones of giants, their shadows stretching across the ice. Evan knelt at the ridge, studying the view through his visor. "Power readings. Low but still active," he muttered. "Someone or something's keeping the core alive." Lyra's stomach twisted. "Do you think people survived?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe the system just doesn't know when to quit. Either way, it's our best shot." They descended carefully, using metal rods and ropes from Evan's pack. The wind was quieter here, but the air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. As they reached the ground, Lyra felt Miko stir and hiss softly. "He senses something," she said nervously. "Yeah," Evan replied, his rifle raised. "So do I." They approached the station gates. The control panel was frozen, its lights flickering weakly. Evan pulled out a tool, sparks flying as he forced the circuits to life. The gate groaned open, revealing a corridor coated in frost. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Frozen equipment lined the walls. Old mining suits hung like ghosts from the ceiling hooks. Lyra's breath echoed in the silence. "This place," she whispered. "It feels dead." Evan crouched near a console, brushing away a thick layer of ice. "Dead things don't have power," he said. "Look." The console flickered to life, showing faint blue text. Power core 35% operational. He smiled faintly. Told you. Still breathing. He began typing commands, trying to link the console to his own device. If we can stabilize this power, I can recharge my beacon. Might finally send a proper distress signal. Lyra stood beside him, watching the blue light reflect on his face. You never stop trying, do you? Evan didn't look up. If you stop trying, you're already dead. For a moment, she just watched him. The cuts on his cheek, the cracked visor, the burned gloves. Every part of him screamed exhaustion, but his eyes still held a quiet fire. Then Miko growled. A low, throaty sound. Evan froze. What is it? Lyra's eyes widened. There's movement. Near the tunnels. Before he could respond, a clanging noise echoed through the hall. Something metallic crawled out of the shadows. A mining drone, but twisted and burned, its lights glowing red instead of blue. Automated defense, Evan said grimly. Old models. Still running their last orders. The drone aimed a laser cutter, targeting the intruders. Evan pushed Lyra behind a pillar. Stay down! He fired, his plasma rifle slicing through the air. The beam struck the drone's chest, but it kept advancing. Sparks burst across the walls as the drone's cutter sliced past his shoulder. Evan grunted, the blade grazing his armor. He ducked, rolling behind an old machine. Lyra watched in terror. You're bleeding. Doesn't matter, he snapped, reloading. Cover your ears. He threw a small cylinder toward the drone. The explosion echoed through the station, shaking the walls. When the smoke cleared, the machine lay in pieces. The silence returned. Evan leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Blood trickled from his side. Lyra ran to him, pressing a hand to the wound. You can't keep doing this, she cried. He looked at her and smiled weakly. That's what humans do, Lyra. We break, but we don't stop. She shook her head, tears freezing on her cheeks. You could have died. Maybe, he said softly. But at least you'd live. That's worth it. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the hum of the still-working power core filled the silence. Finally, Evan stood up, his steps unsteady but firm. Let's get the signal online. Together they worked, rewiring panels, connecting cables, and patching broken systems. Miko helped by warming frozen circuits, its glow spreading through the console like a living ember. When the beacon finally hummed to life, a faint transmission signal appeared on the screen. Message sent, Evan said quietly, his voice rough. If anyone's listening, they'll find us. Lyra looked at him, eyes full of something new, not just gratitude but awe. Maybe the galaxy was wrong about humans, she whispered. Maybe you were never extinct. Maybe you just refused to die. Evan smiled, the first true smile she'd seen from him. That's kind of our thing. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying the distant echo of howls. The storm was returning. But this time, Lyra didn't feel fear, because beside her stood a human, wounded, stubborn, and unbroken. And she knew one thing for sure. On a planet built to kill everything that breathed, human will burn hotter than fire. The beacon pulsed faintly in the corner of the frozen station, its rhythmic hum echoing through the hollow corridors. For the first time since the crash, there was a trace of hope. Fragile, flickering, but real. Lyra watched the screen that displayed their signal strength, a single green light trembling against the cold. Evan stood near the doorway, fastening his gear. His wound had stopped bleeding, but his movements were stiff. The air smelled faintly of ozone from the last explosion. How long will it take for someone to hear it? She asked quietly. He shrugged, slipping his helmet back on. Could be hours. Could be days. Maybe longer, Lyra frowned. Days? We can't survive that long here. The drones might wake up again and the storm. Exactly why we're not staying, he said, tightening his gloves. We move east. There's an old signal relay tower about 20 kilometers from here. Higher ground, stronger range. If we reach that, someone will hear us for sure. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. 20 kilometers? In this storm? You'll freeze before we're halfway. Evan glanced at her, a faint grin under his cracked visor. I'll freeze if I stand still too. He handed her a smaller pack. Food, heat cells, and one emergency flare. You keep that close, got it? She nodded slowly. Got it. Miko poked its head out of her coat, chirping softly. The little creature had grown weaker again after helping power the beacon. Its warmth flickered faintly like a dying ember. Lyra stroked its fur gently. Stay with me, Miko, please. As they stepped outside, the cold hit them like a wall. The wind had picked up again, howling across the plains like an endless scream. The sky was the color of steel, heavy with new snow. The moment they left the shelter of the mining station, the world became a blur of white. Evan led the way, his armor lights cutting a narrow path through the storm. Lyra followed closely, her hand gripping the back of his pack to stay on course. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. The wind never stopped. The ground cracked underfoot, layers of ice breaking away to reveal deep blue crevices below. "Careful," Evan said, reaching back to steady her. "The ice here's thin," she nodded, her teeth chattering. "How do you know where to go?" "Instinct," he said. "And a bit of luck." "Humans believe in luck?" she asked faintly. Evan chuckled through the comms. "Only when we run out of plans." They walked in silence for a while, saving their breath. The cold had a sound of its own, a low hum like a song of death whispered by the wind. Then out of nowhere, a strange flash of light appeared ahead, green and pulsing, cutting through the fog. Lyra blinked. "What's that?" Evan's hand went to his weapon instantly. Not good. The light moved, unslow at first, then faster. It wasn't natural. It was mechanical. A moment later, a group of flying drones emerged from the fog, sleek, silver, and armed. Not mining bots, security drones. Their lights scanned the snow, locking onto movement. "Down," Evan shouted, grabbing Lyra and diving behind a slab of ice. Blasts of plasma cut through the storm, melting the snow into steam. The air sizzled with energy. Miko squealed, curling against Lyra's chest. "Why are they attacking?" she cried. "They're old defense units," Evan said, loading his rifle. "Still running protocols from the war. Anything moving is a target." He aimed and fired, taking down one drone. Another swooped low, spraying fire across the ice. Lyra reached for a fallen piece of metal, using it as a makeshift shield. "We can't fight them all." "Not planning to," Evan said. "We just have to make them lose track of us." He threw a flare into the snow and fired at it. The explosion of heat and light blinded the drones for a second. "Just long enough. Move," he shouted. They ran, slipping and stumbling through the blinding snow. The wind howled louder, mixing with the shrill beeps of the damaged drones. One blast struck the ground near them, knocking Lyra off balance. Evan grabbed her arm, pulling her up before she could fall into a deep crack in the ice. She gasped for breath, her legs weak. "You saved me again." He smiled beneath his visor. "Guess it's becoming a habit." When the noise finally faded, they stopped to rest behind a frozen ridge. The world around them was silent once more, except for their heavy breathing. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with worry. "You're getting slower, Evan." He exhaled hard, his breath fogging the air. "Just tired." "Not done yet." "Why do you keep pushing yourself like this?" she whispered. "Even when everything hurts?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because someone has to." His voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. Years of pain, loss, and stubborn strength. "When I lost my crew, I promised myself if I ever found another living soul out here, I wouldn't fail them. Doesn't matter if they're human, alien, or something else." Lyra stared at him, her chest tightening. "You really believe that?" "I don't believe it," he said softly. "I live it." The wind eased for a moment, and through the thinning fog, a tall shadow appeared in the distance, a tower rising like a black spear against the gray sky. Lyra's eyes widened. "The relay tower." Evan nodded weakly. "We made it." But as they drew closer, a new sound echoed from the tower's base, deep, metallic, and heavy. Red lights flickered on in the snow. Evan's visor scanned the movement, and his voice hardened. "Something's guarding it." Lyra held Miko close, her heart racing. "What is it?" He lifted his rifle, aiming at the darkness. "Not sure yet," he said. "But whatever it is, we're not turning back now." The snow parted as a massive mechanical shape rose from the ground, something ancient, rusted, but still alive. Its glowing eyes locked on the human and the alien girl standing defiantly before it. The ground shook beneath them as the ancient guardian rose from the snow. Towering machine built of rusted armor and shattered glass. Its body glowed faintly from within, like the dying heart of a long-forgotten war. The eyes burned red, locked on Evan and Lyra with cold intelligence. Lyra stepped back, clutching Miko tightly. "What is that thing?" Evan's visor scanned the massive shape, numbers flashing across his HUD. "Old War Sentinel," he said grimly. "Used to guard mining stations during the human expansion age." Her breath caught. Then it's human-made? Yeah, he said softly, lowering his rifle. But it doesn't recognize me anymore. The sentinel turned its head, its voice echoing like thunder through the frozen air. Unauthorized life forms detected. Purging protocol initiated. Run! Evan shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm. A beam of red light sliced through the ice behind them, melting it to glass. The explosion sent snow flying. They stumbled and fell behind a cracked ridge, the heat burning through their gloves. Evan, Lyra cried. We can't fight that. We don't have to fight it, he said, checking his weapon. We just have to outsmart it. He took a deep breath, thinking fast. His armor's computer showed faint power readings coming from the tower. The relay was still active. If I can connect my signal beacon directly to that tower, we can boost the SOS signal. Someone will hear it. Lyra's eyes widened. But the sentinel... I'll keep it busy, he said simply. She shook her head, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes. You can't. You're hurt and that thing... Lyra, he said, his tone firm but gentle. If we stay here, we both die. If I run distraction, you and Miko get to that tower and link the beacon. You remember how I showed you? She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. I remember. He smiled faintly. Good girl. Before she could protest, he stood, loaded his rifle, and stepped into the open snow. The sentinel's red eyes locked on him instantly. Target, human, priority threat. The beam fired again, scorching across the ground. Evan dove to the side, firing back. His shots hit the creature's neck joint, sparks flying, but it barely flinched. The shockwave threw him backward, armor scraping the ice. Lyra covered her mouth, choking back a scream. Miko trembled in her arms, glowing faintly again as if sensing the human's pain. Evan rose slowly, coughing. His visor was cracked and his oxygen alarm screamed. But he smiled through the static. You'll have to try harder than that, he muttered. He fired again, hitting a support pillar behind the machine. Ice crashed down, burying part of the sentinel's arm. Come on, you big hunk of junk. Over here. The sentinel roared, turning its massive body toward him. Meanwhile, Lyra ran, snow whipping against her face, Miko pressed tightly against her chest. Her legs burned, but she didn't stop. She reached the base of the relay tower, wires jutting out like veins. Okay, she whispered, pulling out Evan's beacon. Her hands shook as she connected cables, sparks biting at her gloves. Miko crawled up her shoulder, glowing brighter, heating the frozen metal until it hummed. The tower lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. Signal strength, 91%. Transmission active. Tears filled her eyes. It's working, Evan. It's working. But her joy vanished when she turned around. The sentinel had broken free. Evan lay in the snow, his rifle shattered beside him, his armor half melted. The machine's claws were inches away from crushing him. Without thinking, Lyra screamed and ran toward him. Evan! The sentinel raised its arm, charging another blast. Miko leapt from her shoulder, landing on the machine's chest. Its fur burst into blinding gold light, heat radiating like a miniature sun. The machine froze, sensors blinding, systems overheating. Lyra reached Evan, pulling at his arm. Get up, please. He opened his eyes weakly, his voice barely a whisper. You did it. The signal. Yes, she cried. But we have to go. The sentinel staggered, burning cracks spreading across its armor. Miko's glow grew brighter and brighter until it was almost too much to look at. Evan realized what was happening. It's overloading. Miko turned its head, eyes soft and sad. Lyra gasped. No, Miko, don't. The little creature let out one final sound and a soft trill, almost like a goodbye. Then, with a blinding flash, it exploded into pure energy. The explosion tore through the ice, the shockwave knocking both of them flat. The sentinel collapsed in a shower of molten metal, its core burning bright before fading into darkness. Silence. When Lyra opened her eyes, she saw nothing but falling snow and the faint outline of the tower still standing. Beside her, Evan stirred, his armor scorched. She reached out, tears streaming down her face. Miko, he's gone. Evan placed a hand on her shoulder. He saved us. Just like you saved me. The air was quiet again. Then faintly a voice crackled through Evan's communicator. Static at first, then words. Unidentified distress beacon received. Coordinates locked. Rescue en route, Lyra gasped. They heard us. Evan smiled faintly beneath his broken visor. Told you someone would. Hours later, as the rescue ship descended through the storm, Its bright lights cut through the endless gray. Lyra looked up, her face pale but full of awe. Evan sat beside her, leaning against a broken beam, watching the lights descend. "Looks like you're going home," he said softly. She turned to him. "We both are." He shook his head slightly. "My body's too damaged. Suit's failing. You go with them." "No," she said, gripping his hand tightly. "You're not dying here. Not after all this." He looked at her, his eyes calm. The same steady fire she had seen since the first night in the storm. "If I don't make it, tell them humans still exist. Tell them we're not monsters. We're protectors." Her tears froze on her cheeks. "I will. I promise." The rescue crew lifted her onto the ship, wrapping her in warmth and light. As the doors closed, she looked out one last time. Through the snow, she saw Evan, the last human, sitting beneath the broken tower, his hand raised in farewell. The ship rose into the sky, and on that frozen world, where hope had once died, a single human's will had burned bright enough to change everything.